His hand slammed against the wall beside her face, trapping her there. Park Min's breath was ragged. His usually cold eyes burning with something Precious had never seen in them before. Not in 18 months of living under the same roof, sleeping in separate wings, moving around each other like two planets that shared an orbit but never once collided. You let him touch you. His voice was deadly quiet, stripped of every layer of composure he usually wore like a second skin. You smiled at him like you wanted him to. Precious did not flinch. She had stopped flinching at Park Min a long time ago, somewhere around month 3, when she had understood that his coldness was not contempt but something else entirely. Something she had spent the remaining 15 months trying and failing not to care about. For 18 months, this man had not touched her. Not beyond what the performance of their public life required. A hand at her lower back at a function, a brief brush of fingers when they needed to look like what they were supposed to be. He had treated her like a masterpiece in a private collection. Displayed. Protected. Never handled. And now his face was inches from hers, jaw set hard, a vein pulsing at his temple. His eyes doing something she had no name for. She is my wife. The way he said those 2 words, like he was hearing them for the first time, like they meant something that had only just this moment become real to him, sent something electric moving through her that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. She should have been afraid. He was, after all, one of the most powerful and quietly dangerous men in Seoul. The kind of man other powerful men were careful around. But all Precious felt was her heart hammering at her ribs as his gaze dropped, slowly and entirely against his will, to her mouth. To understand how she ended up here, pressed against a wall in a penthouse above Seoul by a man who had ignored her for 18 months, you have to go back to where it all began. To the moment Precious Adaeze Mensah became Mrs. Park without ever truly being his wife. Welcome to K-Afro Diary. Get your popcorn ready, let's go. The event was a private preview for Seoul's most prestigious design week, held at a gallery in Cheongdam-dong that was all white walls and calculated lighting and the particular hush of rooms where very expensive things are shown to very powerful people. Precious had been there as the lead designer for Adaeze Studio, a luxury womenswear label she had built with 4 years of relentless work from a 2-room workshop in Yeonam-dong into something that was beginning to attract the kind of attention that changed careers permanently. She had been standing beside a rack of her new collection, talking to a journalist when she first saw him. Park Min stood on the opposite side of the room with the particular stillness of a man who does not need to move to command space. He was not the tallest person there, not the loudest, not the most expensively dressed, though the dark suit he wore was clearly made for him specifically, the kind of tailoring that announced itself only to people who understood what they were looking at. What he had was something harder to name. A gravitational quality. People moved around him the way water moves around something solid, and he seemed entirely unbothered by all of it. Their eyes met across the room for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away, with the practiced ease of a man who has decided not to be interested in something, and Precious told herself that the slight skip in her chest was just the champagne. 3 weeks later, her father called her into the sitting room of his Lagos home and sat down across from her with the careful, braced expression of a man about to say something he has been rehearsing. Her father, Adaeze Mensah, was a man who had built everything he had through decades of grinding, careful work, an import-export business that had survived 3 economic crises and put 4 children through universities on 2 continents. He was not a man who made bad decisions carelessly. He was a man who had once trusted the wrong partner at the wrong moment, and that single trust had unraveled faster and more completely than he could have predicted. The debts were specific. The men they were owed to were more specific. And neither the debts nor the men were willing to be patient about it. There is a way forward, her father said, looking at his hands. Park family. They need certain things. International connections. Diplomatic relationships on the continent. Your profile, your brand, the doors you can open. They are willing to clear everything in exchange for a formal arrangement. Precious sat very still. You mean marriage? Her father finally looked at her. His eyes were tired in a way that reached back past this conversation, past the debts, past all of it. He means marriage. She was 27 years old. She had a studio she had built cell by cell, collection by collection. She had a waiting list. She had been invited to show in Paris in the spring, which was the thing she had been working toward since she first picked up a sketch pencil at 14. She had an entire life that was finally, after years of sacrifice and focus, beginning to arrive. But she looked at her father's hands, folded on his knees, and she knew what they had cost him. So she said yes. The wedding was beautiful in the way that things designed entirely by other people for other purposes tend to be beautiful. The flowers were perfect. The venue was the kind of place that made guests feel they were participating in something significant. Precious wore a dress she had designed herself. She had refused to let anyone else make it, that much she had insisted on, and it was extraordinary. Structured ivory silk with hand-embroidered detailing at the collar and cuffs. The kind of work that took 3 of her best seamstresses 11 days. Park Min stood beside her at the altar in a custom charcoal suit and watched the proceedings with the expression of a man completing a necessary transaction. When the officiant reached the appropriate moment, he turned and pressed his lips to her cheek for approximately 1 second. Precise. Controlled. The kiss of a man who has agreed to perform an action and is performing it correctly. That night, in the penthouse that would become her gilded, silent home, he sat across from her in the living room and laid out the terms with the efficiency of someone who had thought through all the relevant variables in advance. You will have your own wing. I will have mine. We attend functions together as required. In public we are exactly what everyone expects. In private we are 2 people who share an address. His voice was even. His expression gave away nothing. He stood, as if to signal that the administrative portion of the evening was complete. I don't do love, precious. I don't do closeness. This is a structure, not a relationship. She had looked at him for a long moment. She was still in her wedding dress. The embroidery at her collar caught the light. And if I want something different? She did not entirely know why she asked. Perhaps because something about his deliberate remoteness made her want to locate the edges of it. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, maybe. Then you married the wrong man, he said. He walked to his wing. The door closed. Precious sat alone in the living room of her new home, in the dress she had spent 11 days making, and understood very precisely what the next however many years of her life were going to look like. For 18 months, that was exactly how they lived. Precious woke every morning in a bedroom that was designed to be beautiful and which felt like sleeping inside a very expensive absence. She ate breakfast alone. She left for her studio in Mapo before 8 and came home after 8, and the hours between belonged to her completely, which was the one genuine mercy of the arrangement. She told herself she didn't notice him. She built her life accordingly, threw herself into the spring Paris collection with a ferocity that her team found both inspiring and mildly alarming. She hired 2 new seamstresses and a junior designer fresh out of Hongik University who had real instincts. She found a ceramics class in Insadong on Saturday mornings that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with a specific need to make something with her hands that had no deadline attached to it. She told herself she didn't lie awake listening for the sound of his key in the front door. She was not entirely successful. There was a particular quality to his presence in the shared spaces they occasionally occupied simultaneously. The kitchen in the early morning, the corridor between wings, the living room on the rare evenings when neither of them had anywhere else to be. He was never rude. He was never unkind. He was simply somewhere behind glass, always, in a way that was more unsettling than outright coldness would have been because it gave you just enough to wonder about what was on the other side of it. She noticed things in spite of herself. The way he read, physical books, always usually something dense and historical. The way he took his coffee, which was black and without ceremony. The way he occasionally stopped in the corridor outside her studio space in the eastern wing. She had converted one of the spare rooms into a secondary workspace for late nights, and did not come in but did not immediately walk away either, standing for just a moment outside the door before moving on. She never acknowledged it. But she noticed. Then Jihun happened. He appeared at the Adaeze studio spring preview in Hongdae on a Friday evening, introduced by a mutual contact as a collector with serious interest in emerging Korean design. He was charming in the open, uncomplicated way of someone who had never been told his charm was a problem. He asked precise, informed questions about her collection that made clear he had done his research, and he had the specific quality of attention, interested, direct, unhurried, that Precious had quietly been starving for inside the glass walls of the penthouse. They talked for 2 hours. At the end of the evening, he asked if she would meet him for coffee to continue the conversation about a potential collaboration. She said yes. She told herself it was professional. For the first 3 weeks it was professional, or close enough to it. He was easy to be around in a way that made her understand, by contrast, how much energy she spent every day in the penthouse holding herself at the particular careful distance that living with Park Min required. With Jihun she could exhale, could be the version of herself that laughed easily, that talked about her work with enthusiasm instead of guarded professionalism, that made observations about the world and had them received without the slight, constant uncertainty of wondering what was actually being registered behind someone's eyes. "Your husband is very lucky," he said one afternoon over coffee in Itaewon. She had mentioned the marriage briefly on their third meeting. She looked into her cup. "It's a complicated situation." He studied her. "You don't have to explain it." He paused. "But I want you to know that whoever he is, whatever the arrangement is, the way you just described your spring collection, the way your face changed, that is someone who deserves to be seen. Properly. Not managed from a distance." She pulled back slightly. She noticed that he had called it an arrangement without her using that word first. She didn't mention it. Because she admitted to herself much later, too hungry for the uncomplicated warmth of being visible to ask the question she should have asked. Jihun kept appearing. Her studio. At the ceramics class in Insadong, which she had never mentioned to him. At the gallery in Bukshan where she had gone alone on a Wednesday to look at a textile exhibition. Each time with the easy smile. Each time with that particular attentiveness that made her feel, briefly, like the world was the right size. "Leave," he said one evening as they walked along Cheonggyecheon. "Whatever arrangement you're in, it's hollowing you out. You deserve someone who chooses you. Entirely and without conditions." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Can give you that. I want to." She felt the pull of it, the clean, simple narrative of it. The story where she walked away from the complicated, cold, glass-walled life, and into something open and warm and uncomplicated. But something in her gut did not settle the way it should have when something true is being offered. She smiled. "Me think." She walked home. The week after that conversation, she came home to find Park Min in the main living room. This was unusual enough to register. He was almost never there in the evening. He was either in his office on the upper floor or absent from the penthouse entirely on business she had learned not to ask about directly. But tonight he was in the living room with a glass of something untouched on the table beside him and his eyes on the windows, and he looked up when she came in with an expression she could not immediately categorize. She was wearing one of her own pieces, a deep rust-colored dress from the winter collection, structured at the shoulder, the kind of thing she wore when she wanted to feel like herself rather than like an accessory to someone else's life. He looked at her for a moment longer than he usually allowed himself to. "You're dressed differently." She set her bag down. "It's my own design." "No." He paused. "I mean you look." He stopped. "You're going somewhere." "Came from somewhere," she corrected. "Studio event." He stood. Even after all this time, the shift in the room when he stood and moved closer was something she had never entirely gotten used to. "You've been out a great deal." She held his gaze. "Have a life, Min." "Several of them, actually. My studio, my work, my—" "Who is he?" The question was quiet. More quiet than a question that direct had any right to be. She felt her chin lift. "I don't know what you mean." His jaw worked. Something moved across his face. There and gone, faster than she could name it. But she had spent 18 months becoming extremely good at reading the small movements of this man's expression, the ones he didn't know he was making. "You are my wife," he said. The words came out before she could select them more carefully. "Paper. That is the only place I am anything to you." Something cracked in his expression. Sealed itself immediately. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he looked at it and she watched him make the decision, the same decision he always made, to let the distance win. "Have business." He walked out. Precious stood in the living room for a long moment. Then she went to her studio wing, sat down at her drafting table, and did not sketch anything for a full hour. Just sat in the quiet of her own space and let herself feel the full, exhausting weight of wanting something from someone who had built his entire life around giving nothing. Everything came apart at the Park Foundation charity gala. They went together as required. It was the kind of event that mattered to the architecture of the life Park Min maintained in public. Important guests, important optics, important silence about the more complicated business that underwrote all of it. Precious wore something she had made for the occasion. Deep emerald silk, understated and perfect, the kind of dress that required nothing from the room because it was entirely complete in itself. She felt his hand at her lower back as they entered. Felt, as she always did, the precise, controlled nature of the contact. Present enough to communicate what needed to be communicated publicly, gone the moment the public requirement was satisfied. She spent the first hour moving through the room, talking to people she genuinely liked, accepting a glass of champagne and a conversation about textile sourcing with a buyer she had been wanting to meet. She was good at these events. She had learned to be. Then she turned and saw Jihun across the room. She felt the specific cold that moves through you when two separate compartments of your life make unexpected eye contact with each other. He was dressed impeccably, moving through the room with his usual ease, and the moment he saw her his face opened into that warm, familiar smile. She felt, rather than saw, Park Min go still beside her. Not visibly. To anyone else in the room he was exactly as he always was. Composed, contained, present without being readable. But she had spent 18 months at close range and she felt it. The specific, almost imperceptible tension of someone receiving information they were not prepared for. "You know him," she said quietly. Was. When he spoke his voice was the particular flatness that meant the opposite of calm. "Kwon Jihun. He runs a network of distribution channels that we have been in direct conflict with for 4 years. He is not a collector, Precious. He has never been a collector." Her blood went cold. "How long have you been meeting with him?" She turned to look at Park Min. And for the first time, the first genuine, unguarded time, she saw something real in his face. Not the blankness. Not the controlled remoteness. Something that looked, with startling clarity, like pain. "I didn't know who he was." Her voice was steady. "I swear to you." "How long?" "About 2 months. But Min." Jihun appeared beside them. "Park." His voice was pleasant, conversational. The voice of a man who had arranged to be exactly here at exactly this moment. He turned to Precious with the warmth she now understood had been constructed specifically for her. "Precious, you look extraordinary tonight." The way he said her name, familiar, intimate, designed, made her skin feel wrong. "Stay away from her." Park Min's voice was barely audible. Jihun's smile widened in a way that made clear the smile had never been for her at all. "Does she know what she is to you? Because from where I've been standing, she's been invisible to you for 18 months. Maybe she needed someone who could actually see her." She saw it happen. Park Min's fist. Jihun's jaw. The crowd pulling back in that specific silent way of people witnessing something that has broken through the surface of a carefully managed evening. Security moving in from 3 directions. And Park Min's eyes, cutting across the sudden chaos to find hers, blazing with something wild and ungoverned and entirely, devastatingly real. "We're leaving." He took her hand. Not roughly. Not gently. With a desperate, focused grip that communicated something she had no framework for because she had never felt it from him before. She went. The car ride home was the loudest silence she had ever sat inside. His driver kept his eyes precisely forward. Park Min sat beside her with his hand still holding hers as though the connection was the only thing keeping some internal structure from collapsing. He looked out the window. The Seoul night moved past the glass. She looked at his profile. At the set of his jaw, the slight tension around his eyes, the way his thumb was moving, small, unconscious circles against the back of her hand. She was not sure he knew he was doing it. When they reached the penthouse and the door closed behind them, he stood in the center of the room and for the first time in 18 months, he looked like someone who had put down something very heavy and was not entirely sure what to do with his hands now that they were empty. Did you sleep with him? His voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. But she heard it. Well, she took a step toward him. But would it matter if I had? He laughed. It was a short, broken sound that had nothing of humor in it. I haven't slept properly in 2 months. I come home and hear you laughing in your studio, and I stand outside that door for longer than I should. I see you leave in the morning wearing something you made with your own hands, and I think, he stopped. Pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. I notice everything, precious. I have noticed everything since the day we met. But you made the rules. Her voice came out uneven. You decided what this was going to be. You drew every line. 'Cause I am not safe. The words came out fast, like something that had been under pressure for a very long time. I am not a man people should love. Everything I allow myself to want, I end up damaging. And you walked into this arrangement already sacrificing things you shouldn't have had to sacrifice, and you are extraordinary. Your work, the way your mind moves, the way you fight for what you believe in. And I thought if I kept my distance, at least I wouldn't take that from you too. He turned away. Pressed both hands flat against the wall. I told myself it was protection. He said it quietly. But I have been watching you build a life in spite of me for 18 months, and He stopped. The room was very still. And, Precious said. He turned back. His expression was stripped of every professional layer, every calculated blankness, every wall he had ever stood behind in her presence. And I am in love with you. His voice was raw and entirely certain at the same time. I have been since before I had any right to be. Watched you design that wedding dress yourself because you weren't going to let anyone else make it. Watched you convert a spare room into a studio at 11 at night. Watched you learn to read the room at every terrible business function we attended together and do it better than people who had been doing it their whole lives. Watched you refuse every single day to be diminished by a situation that would have diminished most people. He crossed the space between them. I kept the distance because I thought it protected you. But all I did was leave you alone. And he found you in that alone. The air between them had the particular weight of things that have been true for a long time and are finally being spoken. Precious looked at him. This man she had been married to on paper and had been learning against her will for a year and a half. This complicated, controlled, finally open man standing in front of her with all his walls on the floor around him. Then stop deciding what I need, she said. Stop choosing for me. His eyes darkened. She closed the remaining distance between them. I am tired of lying awake listening for you. Tired of standing in rooms with you and feeling the glass between us. Tired of pretending I don't see what I see when I look at you. His hands came up to hold her face. Careful, like she might be real or might not be. And then he kissed her. It was 18 months of restraint in a single moment. Hungry and careful at the same time. Desperate and deliberate. His hands cradling her face like something he had been afraid to touch for so long that touching it was almost more than he could absorb all at once. She pulled him closer by the lapels of the suit that had been made for him specifically, and she felt, moving through her like a clean current, the particular relief of something finally arriving that has been on its way for a very long time. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing unsteadily. He planned it, Park Min said against her forehead. Kwon Jihun. Every coffee meeting, every accidental appearance at your studio, every conversation designed to make you feel invisible in your own marriage. He has been trying to dismantle me for 4 years, and he found the most effective possible entry point. So she was a weapon, Precious said. Well, his hands tightened slightly. You were never a weapon. That is exactly why it almost worked. He thought you would fracture. He chose you because he thought you were the weakness. But you are the opposite of a weakness, Precious. You are the only thing in 4 years that has made me want to be something other than what I am. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, you are a genuinely infuriating man. No. 18 months. No. His thumb moved along her cheekbone. I will spend the rest of whatever time you give me making up for every single one of them. She should have made him wait. Some dignified, self-respecting part of her registered this clearly. Instead, she kissed him again. This one was slower, deeper. The kind of kiss that is a decision as much as a feeling. There is more you need to know, he told her the next morning. She was at his kitchen counter in one of his shirts, which was absurdly large and which she had absolutely no intention of returning, drinking coffee and watching the morning light find the edges of Seoul through the penthouse windows. About your father's situation. He sat across from her, his expression careful. Her hands stilled around her cup. The investment that failed. The pressure that followed. He held her gaze. It was not an accident. Jihun's network orchestrated it. They knew my family needed specific kinds of international reach. They knew I would agree to an arranged marriage to secure it. They manufactured the conditions deliberately. Her chest went cold. My father lost nearly everything because of someone else's war. He did not look away. And I knew the shape of it when I agreed to the arrangement. I used your father's situation, precious. I secured what my family needed and I told myself it was a fair exchange because I would protect you both from that point forward. But I did not protect you from me, from this life, from the 1.5 years of silence that I chose because I was afraid. She sat with this for a long moment. She should have been furious. She was furious. At Jihun, at the machinery of it, at the cold, instrumental way her father's vulnerability had been used as a mechanism in someone else's strategy. But there was something else underneath the anger when she looked at the man sitting across from her. You could have told me at the beginning, she said. You could have made me hate him from day one. Controlled the whole situation from the start. But you didn't. His jaw worked. Well, it did not. She looked at him. Why? Because you deserve to make your own decisions. Even if those decisions cost me something. She reached across the counter and covered his hand with hers. You are not as uncomplicated as you like people to believe, Park Min. Something moved across his face. Don't make me better than I am. I'm not. She turned his hand over and held it properly. I know exactly what you are. I've been watching it for 18 months. But I also know what you just told me, which is that you had a choice and you chose to give me mine. His throat moved. That matters, she said simply. What do we do about Jihun? What followed was 3 weeks of precious learning a great deal about the man she had married on paper, and was only now beginning to marry in every other sense. The full shape of Park Min's world revealed itself gradually, the way a city looks different at different hours, familiar from a distance and increasingly complicated up close. The operations his family ran were not simple, not clean, not things she could look at without acknowledging what they were. She sat in on meetings she had not been invited to before and listened with the focused attention she brought to everything she did seriously. She asked questions that made the men around the table look briefly at Park Min with something between surprise and reassessment. You shouldn't be in these rooms, he told her one evening. Too late. She was sketching at the end of the conference table, half listening to a conversation about logistics and security. She had discovered that working in proximity to him helped her design. She could not explain this and had stopped trying to. You're stuck with me now. He sat down beside her and looked at her sketch. What is that? New silhouette. She turned the page toward him. For the autumn collection. Strong shoulder, almost architectural. Thinking about power that doesn't need to announce itself. He looked at it for a long moment. That's me, he said. She smiled. That's both of us. The move came on a Thursday evening. Her first major solo exhibition. Not a studio preview, not an industry event, but a proper showing. 40 pieces, 3 years of her most considered work alongside new designs from the current collection, hung in a gallery in Hongdae that had more natural light per square meter than anywhere else in Seoul. Precious had been preparing for it for 8 months. It represented something she could not entirely articulate to anyone who hadn't spent years working toward a single moment of arrival. Park Min was supposed to meet her there after a business meeting that was running late. She was deep in conversation with a gallerist about hanging placement when she felt it, the particular sensation of being watched in a way that is different from the ordinary ambient attention of a room full of people. He turned. Kwon Jihun was standing at the far end of the gallery, looking at one of her pieces with the practiced expression of a man who has decided to appear to be doing something other than what he is actually doing. He looked up when she turned. Smile. He moved toward her through the room of her own work and she felt the wrongness of it. This space she had built with years of herself, and him in it, with the same smile that had once made her feel visible and now made her feel surveilled. He stopped in front of her. "Walk outside with me," he said. "Just to talk. Or everyone in this building deals with the consequences of you saying no." She looked at the room. Her work on the walls. The gallerist still nearby. The small crowd of press and buyers and friends who had come because they cared about what she had made. She thought about Park Min, whose meeting had run late, who did not yet know where this evening was going. She thought about the self-defense training she had quietly enrolled in 5 months ago, after a long conversation with Park Min's head of security, who had been very clear about what this life occasionally required. She thought about the small blade that the same head of security had spent 3 sessions showing her how to use and where to keep it. She looked at Jihun. "Okay," she said. "Let's talk." She walked outside ahead of him. The last thing she was aware of was the pressure of a hand at her shoulder, and then the Seoul night tilted and went dark. She woke in a room that was neither a gallery nor anywhere she recognized. Industrial. Cold. The kind of space that had once been used for something functional and now held the particular emptiness of somewhere repurposed for something else. Her wrists were secured behind her. Her head ached in a specific, insistent way. Jihun sat across from her on a metal chair, entirely relaxed, scrolling through his phone. "Wait." He looked up. He slid his phone into his pocket. "Min should be receiving the details shortly." She said nothing. She was already doing something else. The quiet, methodical assessment she had been trained to do. Location of her hands. State of the restraints. Position of the door. Position of Jihun relative to the door. The small blade, which she had kept in her left inner sleeve all evening because it was a public event with a lot of people she didn't know and because Park Min's head of security had been very clear about consistency. "He'll come for you," Jihun said. "That's the problem with him now. He was dangerous before but manageable. Predictable. A man who kept everyone at a distance is a man you can read. But a man who has something he can't afford to lose." He shook his head. "He becomes something else." "You used me to find out what that something was," Precious said. Her voice was even. She was working her left wrist carefully. "I used your loneliness." He said it without apology, which he provided so efficiently. "All that talent, all that life, and he just left you alone inside it. You were genuinely easy to be around, though. That part wasn't performance. But the rest was. The rest was strategy." He looked at her without hostility, which was, she thought, the most unsettling thing about him. There was no malice in his expression. Just the clean, practical regard of someone looking at a variable in an equation. "That's the difference between Min and me. He felt things and buried them. I never felt anything. Easier that way." The entrance of the building came apart. Not a door opening. The actual entrance, the rolling gate, giving way under something that had been applied to it with considerably more force than a key. Light came in with a cold air. Then Park Min walked through the gap with 3 men at his flanks and his face carrying an expression she had never seen there before and hoped never to see directed at her. The complete, unguarded fury of a man who has been pushed past every boundary he maintains and is entirely done maintaining them. He found her eyes across the room immediately. He looked at her with a rapid, precise inventory. Assessment, not sentiment, though the sentiment was there underneath it, and something in his shoulders settled fractionally when she held his gaze and nodded once to tell him she was all right. Jihun stood. He had a weapon in his hand before she had fully registered the motion. It was pointed at her. "End of the road, Min." His voice was pleasant. It had always been pleasant. "Put your men down and walk away, and she goes home. That's the only version of tonight that ends cleanly." Park Min did not look at the weapon. He looked at Jihun with the particular calm of someone who has already run every scenario and knows which one is coming. "You built your entire strategy around understanding what I value," he said. His voice was quiet. "But you made the mistake of assuming that what I value most is something I have to protect." Jihun's eyes narrowed fractionally. Precious looked at the door. Then she dropped her weight sideways off the chair. The left sleeve of her dress gave up the blade in exactly the way she had practiced. The zip tie at her wrists had been partially compromised for the last 11 minutes. It gave on the second sharp motion exactly as she had been shown it would. The gun went off. Wait. The sound of it inside the metal room was enormous. And then everything was very fast and very loud, and then it was over. Jihun was on the ground with Park Min's knee on his chest and a weapon at his temple, and the expression on Park Min's face was something she had never wanted to see, and also something she understood with complete, unflinching clarity. The face of a man who is capable of ending something and is standing at the exact edge of the decision. Min. She said his name clearly. Not loudly. He heard her. His eyes found hers. Don't. She crossed to him and put her hand on his shoulder. She felt the tension in him, the full, coiled weight of it, and kept her hand steady. He is not worth what you become if you do this. He took you. She knelt beside him so they were level. He underestimated both of us. And we are both still here. That is enough. The war in his face was visible. Every part of it. She watched the decision happen. Watched him choose, deliberately and at real cost, the version of himself he wanted to be more than he wanted the version that felt easier right now. He pulled back. Pulled her into him with both arms, hard. And she felt the slight unsteadiness in him that he would never let anyone else see. Take him, he said to his men. His voice was steady. His arms were not. His head of security fielded the instruction, and 2 minutes later Jihun was gone, and the warehouse was quieter, and Park Min had his forehead pressed against hers in the cold and the dark with his eyes closed. I heard the gun, he said. No. I'm here. I heard the gun and... Min. She pulled back to look at him. She put her hands on his face. I'm here. I'm fine. We are okay. He looked at her for a long time in the dim remaining light of the warehouse. You cut yourself free. Learned from the best, she said. Your head of security is very thorough. Something broke open in his expression. Not grief. Not relief. Something that was both of those things and also something she could not name, which she suspected had something to do with the specific experience of realizing that the person you love does not need saving as much as they need a partner. He kissed her in the middle of the wreckage of the evening. She kissed him back. They walked out together. 2 months later, Precious stood at the windows of what was now genuinely, unambiguously, their bedroom. The city spread below her soul in the early evening, the particular blue hour when the lights were just beginning to come up and the sky hadn't entirely decided to be night yet. She had a sketchbook in her hand and she was not sketching, just looking. Taking in the specific quality of a moment that felt, in a way she had not experienced in a very long time, entirely earned. Park Min appeared behind her. His arms came around her from behind and his chin rested on her shoulder, and she felt, as she did every morning and every evening now, the specific ease of a body that has decided to stop bracing. What are you designing? He asked. Nothing. She leaned back into him. Just looking. He was quiet for a moment. Then the Paris show. Tell me about it. She smiled. It's in 4 months. The collection is almost finished. The new silhouettes, the ones I started working on after everything with Jihun, they're different. Stronger. More honest than anything I've done before. What changed? She thought about it. I stopped designing for the version of myself that was trying to prove something. Started designing for the version that just is. It's less careful. But it's more true. He pressed his lips to her temple. That's the version I've been watching for 18 months. You could have said so. I was an idiot. You were terrified, she corrected. There is a difference. Not a flattering one, but still. His arms tightened slightly. I spent 18 months trying to protect you by keeping you at a distance, and all I did was hand the most dangerous person in my life a direct path to the thing I was trying to protect. She turned in his arms to look at him. Then let it teach you something. What? That the people worth protecting are not protected by walls. She looked at him steadily. They are protected by honesty, by closeness, by being chosen every day out loud so they don't have to wonder. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was the one she had learned to love most of all the expressions that had slowly become available to her, unguarded, certain, a little undone. I choose you, he said. Loud. Every day. But she straightened his collar, which did not need straightening but which gave her hands something to do. "'Cause I am also choosing you. Every day. Including the days when you are still slightly impossible." "Just slightly," she considered. "Moderately." He kissed her. She let him. Later, in the dark, he said her name the way he had said it in the corridor outside her studio all those months ago. Like it meant something, like it was the word he would reach for first if someone asked him to name the most important thing. She pressed her palm flat against his chest and felt his heartbeat. Steady and certain. Present in the way it had always been, even behind the glass, even in the silence. She understood that now. Always there. Just learning, like her, how to let itself be known. "You once told me you didn't do love," she said. She felt his chest move. "I was wrong about a great many things." "You were. Are you keeping a list?" She smiled in the dark. She said, "Go to sleep, Min." He laughed. Quietly. The real one. The one she had spent 18 months earning through walls and glass, and the particular patience of a woman who had refused, every single day, to stop being fully herself inside a situation designed to diminish her. Outside, Seoul glittered and moved and continued, vast and indifferent, the way cities do. Inside, precious Adaeze Mensah had found the thing she had not designed a single one of her collections around, and which turned out to be the most structurally essential thing of all. Not visibility. Not validation. Not the warm, easy attention of someone who saw only what they needed to see. The real thing. The difficult thing. The thing that had required jealousy to wake it up in a man who had been sleeping on it for 18 months. And itch, now that it was awake, had absolutely no intention of ever going back to sleep. If this story had you ready to shake Park Min through the screen for all 18 of those months, you are not alone. Drop a comment and tell me at exactly which point you lost patience with him. And if you made it all the way to the end, you are officially K-Afro Diary family. Subscribe and turn on your notifications because the next story is already coming. And trust me, you do not want to be the last one to know. You there.